Hello, this is Steve Moyer from Moyer Marine. In this project overview, we will be replacing the reversing gear in a late model Atomic 4 direct drive engine. While this project is fairly straightforward and easy enough on our workbench, it may prove to be somewhat more difficult with the engine still installed on your boat. So before proceeding, we recommend having a Moyer Marine service and overhaul manual on hand. Also, you will greatly benefit from watching two other video tech tips before you start. First, the rear oil seal replacement video, and then the reversing gear overview video. Each of these videos will reveal slightly different information, as well as different tools and techniques while working on the reversing gear and the output coupling. Here's a quick rundown of some of the tools you might be needing for this project. You'll need sockets or wrenches in the following sizes: 1/2 inch, 9/16 inch, 3/4 inch, and 1 1/8 inch. A breaker bar, a putty knife or a heavy-duty scraper, a large size common screwdriver, a 3/16 inch punch. We used a ball peen hammer and a mallet, some Permatex Aviation brand gasket sealer, 2 5/16 inch coarse bolts. We used 5.5 inches, but really anything between 4.5 and 6 is okay. A pair of channel lock pliers. We also used two specialty tools to save some time: an output coupling holding tool and an output coupling puller. We're going to start by removing our water pump. This lower bolt is actually one of our Moyer Marine lower water pump extender bolts. It's stainless. Very handy to have, as reaching this bottom bolt can be really difficult. Next, we'll remove the reversing gear cover plate. You really don't need to totally drain your oil for this project. We drained about 2 quarts. Lowering the oil to this level will make the job a little bit neater, and we'll explain that as we go on. I'm just going to use my heavy-duty scraper here to bend up the tab washer. We'll be using one of our output coupling holding tools. This tool is really a great help, especially if you're working alone. It essentially holds the output coupling stationary while you turn the large reversing gear tail nut off. These don't have to be super tight. I just barely snug them down with a 9/16 inch wrench. Okay, now we'll use our 1 1/8 socket and breaker bar. This can take a fair amount of strength even on the workbench. It will eventually yield, however, and there it is. These nuts can be reused. We're going to set our holding tool aside for later, as we will need it. I normally use 2 putty knives or 2 screwdrivers, etc., to remove the locking tab washer. This can be reused if you still have a good tab. If not, you'll need to order a new one. The second specialty tool we recommend is the output coupling puller. Here again, it makes the job much easier. Simply turn in the 3 outside bolts and then turn in the pulling bolt. You'll need a 3/4 inch wrench or socket. Simply tighten and remove the coupler. Now we'll remove the flange bolts. The oil seal flange normally lets go quite easily. The bearing flange will have to be pried off with some type of a scraper and a mallet. I'm going to move up to an old chisel I use here to finish it. We will head over to the workbench in a little bit to show how to replace the oil seal and the rear thrust bearing. We'll go ahead now and remove the rest of the aft housing bolts. There are different sizes. Some are going to be a little bit longer, so please make a note of which bolts go where. Here's another one that's slightly longer, so make sure here again you keep track of these. All of the bolts used on the aft housing are 5/16, which require a 1/2 inch socket. With the exception of these last two, which are for the accessory drive, they're 3/8 inch, so you'll need a 9/16 socket for these. You don't have to remove the accessory drive before starting this project. Next, we're going to loosen the nut that's on the brake band adjusting bolt. I like to use a 3/16 inch punch for this. Just start to loosen. The goal is to loosen this nut enough that we can pull out the brake band reversing bar. Try not to turn the nut totally off. After the nut is loose enough, gently pry out the reversing bar up and over out of the shifting yoke, just like this. It won't pull out yet, so we're going to turn some more. Keep loosening. The ears on the brake band can sometimes hang up on the adjusting bolt, so I like to take a pair of large channel locks and just compress the ears together, working the spring. Just give it a squeeze. Now I can grab the reversing bar. I'm going to use the pliers here and just pull and pry, and it'll pop out. So we can set that aside. Using my scraper, I'm going to separate the reversing gear band brace, which basically has a hook on the end. Get that out of the way. It'll stay connected to the aft housing. Next, using the scraper, I'm going to start to separate the aft housing from the block. You'll notice that there's a fair amount of resistance, and this is caused by two tapered pins that are installed at the factory. There's one here on the right, and the other one is on the left, right here. They're actually tapered and driven into the block, and they will resist, so there they are. I'm going to tip the aft housing to the right and lift away. And there it is. You'll notice that the shifting lever, the reversing gear cross shaft, the reversing band brace or the hook, and the shifting yoke all stay together, still attached to the aft housing. You will not need to disassemble this. Simply set the entire aft housing aside. So here's our brake band adjusting bolt with the nut. There's a small shoulder on the bolt. I want to just point that out to you. It's right there. Make a mental note of that because it comes into play later on during assembly. The reversing gear simply pulls off the crankshaft and you can lift that away. Now this will be your reversing gear core that you send back to Mori Marine when you purchase your rebuilt reversing gear. We kindly ask that you use the same packing materials when you send yours back. This ensures that it will not be damaged in shipping. Now we'll pull out the brake band assembly. This is why we want to lower our oil a little bit. Ours is not touching the oil. If you don't drain the oil, it'll actually be submerged in oil and can make a mess. Next, we're going to remove the small pilot bearing. Sometimes a magnet will do this. If not, get a pair of needle nose. Now, if you don't see the pilot bearing here, check the reversing gear. It'll either be at one of two places, the crankshaft or in the reversing gear. If you don't see it at either of these two places, there's a very good chance it fell down in the oil pan. So get your magnet and fish it out. The rear oil seal is fairly easy to drive out. I'm going to be using 2 sections of scrap 2x4 and an 1.5 inch NPT pipe. Simply take a mallet and drive the seal out. There it is. You'll want to inspect the surface where the seal mounts to make sure there's no rust, corrosion, or serious dings that could cause leaking. And this facing looks pretty good. We're going to drive the new seal in the same direction as the old one. I like to use a brass mallet for this, or a ball peen hammer. It'll try to pop out. Just keep driving around till it starts to seat. And then make sure there's no raised areas. And that looks pretty good. The rear thrust bearing on the Atomic 4 is very robust and durable. There's a very good chance it can last the life of the engine. So unless you have any rust or corrosion, or you can feel any loose side-to-side play, you can probably simply reuse the bearing you have. However, for the sake of this video, we'll show you how to do it. You're going to do exactly the same thing. I'm using the same pipe and drive the bearing out. This bearing came out very easily. You can see there's a lip here, so the bearing only can be driven in one way. You'll notice there's a shielded side and an unshielded side of this bearing. Make sure you put the shielded side facing the engine. The open side will face the output coupling. I'm not using the pipe, I'm using a nice piece of flat steel. That's great. We find reinstalling the aft housing much easier if you knock out the alignment pins. You can use a ball peen hammer and simply drive them out. If you have any rust on the engine, it can take a little bit of pounding here. And there they are. I just wanted to point out the oil dipstick tube while we're on the workbench. Just be aware of this. This tends to bump into the reversing gear brake band, and you won't be able to figure out why you can't move the aft housing forward. If that happens, just be aware of this tube. We're going to have to remove any leftover gasket material. A putty knife or scraper will handle this. A lot of the gaskets fell away when I pulled things apart. Since we're not dropping the oil pan, we're not going to be able to use a full set of oil pan gaskets. So we're going to very carefully work the gaskets off the best we can all the way to the block. Then grab yourself a razor blade and cut the gasket away. Make sure you get all the way to the block with your blade. Just keep cutting and pull that away. And we'll need to do the same thing on the left side. Get in nice and close. There's only a tiny fragment of gasket here, but that needs to be removed. I'm taking some degreaser and cleaning off all the gasket surfaces. I want to get any grease, oil, or old sealant off of there. Very important to get that nice and clean. So you probably guessed we're going to have to cut our new set of oil pan gaskets to the right size. From the long end, or the end we won't be using, cut off 14 1/4 inches. This will leave around 9 1/8 inches left. This may be a bit too long, allowing you to trim it until it's perfect. So here's our two sections I cut ahead of time. They fit in there nice and neat. The holes are lined up, and the top of the gasket is firmly against the block. These look really good. Oil pan gaskets are normally installed dry, but since we're cutting them and I don't want them to be sliding around, I'm going to install just a thin film of Permatex, aviation brand, on the gasket surface. The most common place for oil leaks to occur is right here at the intersection between the oil pan, the block, and the aft housing, so be generous with the Permatex there. There's just enough stickiness to Permatex that it will hold the gaskets fairly well in place. Work the gasket on, lining up the holes. And we'll do the same thing to the left side. Next, we'll apply a thin film of Permatex at the very top of the gaskets. Here again, we're trying to seal up that intersection. The aft housing gasket is installed dry. Just line up the holes. These tend to fall forward as you're trying to work, so I like to take a small piece of painter's tape, just a small tab, and adhere the gasket to the block. This way, as we're bumping things around, it'll stay fairly well in line. Now we're going to reinstall our pilot bearing. It usually fits in with hand pressure, but if you need to use a soft mallet, that's okay. Much like the rear thrust bearing, if the condition is good, the pilot bearing does not necessarily have to be replaced. In the end, it's up to you. The brake band simply sits on the edges of the oil pan. The reversing gear will basically go inside the brake band and onto the crankshaft gear. You're going to need to spin the reversing gear until the gears mesh and it pops into place. There it is. You can feel the difference. I like to remove the brake band back a little bit to make things easier. Lean in and take a look at the crankshaft and make a note of the amount of crankshaft that is exposed before the reversing gear. You do not want to pull the reversing gear back during the reassembly, or it will pop off of the crankshaft. If it does pop off the crankshaft, you'll need to rotate the reversing gear again until the gears mesh and it can move forward. Our next step is critical, but will be hidden from the camera view as we do it. When you reinstall the aft housing, you need to make sure the two pins or arms on the throwout bearing, here and here, are level or horizontal, and that they line up with the two notches in the shifting yoke, here and here. This linkage connects the shifting lever with the reversing gear. If you don't link the yoke and bearing together, you won't be able to engage or disengage forward. Okay, we can reinstall our aft housing. I like to hold the brace hook back with my left hand and then set the aft housing kind of up and over so the oil dipstick tube doesn't conflict. That's a pretty good start. I'm going to push the brake band forward now. Now you can actually see the wear marks in the reversing gear. That'll give you a good indication where the brake band used to rest. From this top view, you can see here and here how the shifting yoke tabs are basically holding the throwout bearing captive. Once again, this allows you to engage and disengage forward gear. If you can clearly see the bearing arms, or if the bearing has rotated and the arms are facing up and down, and not held under the yoke notches, you will need to remove the aft housing and try again. More than likely the gaskets have slipped a little bit, so I'm going to take a very small punch, a pointed punch, and just work it through the holes, encouraging the gasket to come in line. Then I'll use a larger punch doing the same thing. That looks good. Just work it through all the holes, making sure everything lines up. Then you can do the same thing to the upper holes, making sure that the gaskets, the holes, the block, and the aft housing are all in alignment. There's one. Good. Let's go ahead and install the few bolts just to keep things in alignment. Very important to note, you don't want to tighten the aft housing down into place yet. Usually 4 or 5 bolts is plenty. We're going to put a few here in the bottom. You don't even want to make these bolts snug. As you can see, the heads of the bolts are not even touching. They're just keeping the aft housing from being bumped. We're going to put a few here in the bottom. And then maybe 1 or 2 at the top. I'm going to go ahead and move my small piece of tape now. I'm going to barely snug these top 2. We can now drive our registration pins back in place. A ball peen hammer is all that's necessary here. The heads of the pins should not be flush. They're just slightly proud of the aft housing. That looks great. Next, you'll need to slip the reversing gear band brace hook over the brake band adjusting bolt. Then move it over to the left, allowing the brace pin to enter the hole in the brace. You may have noticed our brace pin looks different than yours, and that it has a cotter pin locking it in place. This is a Moyer Marine tapered brace pin. It was developed because the factory brace pins had a tendency to simply fall out of the brake band here, causing the reversing gear to malfunction. If you want one, you can order them on our website. Next, take a screwdriver and rotate the adjusting bolt so the slot for the reversing bar is facing upward. Now grab a pair of channel lock pliers and compress the ears of the brake band together against the spring tension. Take a large screwdriver and leverage the nut side of the adjusting bolt, moving it as far right as possible. You're trying to get as much slot showing as possible to slide the reversing bar in place. You may have to pry a little bit, get it started, and it will pop in. Then release the pliers. If you can't get the bar to go in, try loosening the nut on the adjusting bolt a little bit more. But be careful not to turn it off all the way or it'll fall off into your oil pan. Next, slide the reversing bar to the right and into the yoke the way it started. Next, we're going to move on to installing our rear flanges. This is where you will use the two 5/16" bolts I mentioned. We learned a long time ago that this can be very messy and tricky without these bolts. Basically, you want to run the bolts through the oil seal flange, slip on a gasket, then run them through the bearing flange, and slip on the other gasket. The holes only line up one way, so take your time and figure out the alignment, then slip it all together. Like that. This keeps everything in alignment and will make the job much easier. Then figure out which bolt holes line up and turn the bolts in. That's going to go in nicely. I'm noticing there's an alignment issue here with the aft housing. It's just back a little bit. I'm going to tighten up these two bolts a little bit more to pull it forward. Hopefully get things flush in the back. That's better. I'm going to take my razor blade and cut away any bits of gasket that are protruding. You don't want to have anything at all blocking the way of the bearing flange as we try to install it. There's a little bit on the inside too. Just cut it away with your razor blade. We're going to use some more Permatex aviation sealer on all the surfaces. You're basically making a Permatex gasket sandwich. Now we'll move the first gasket forward. Then repeat. This is why, in case you were wondering, we don't fully tighten the aft housing bolts. We want there to be a little bit of flexibility as we tap in the bearing flange so it's allowed to fully seat. And we continue on with the sealer. Then we slide in the seal flange. Next, we'll install our flange bolts. You can go ahead and remove your 5/16 guide bolts. Now you can go ahead and tighten them up. There are no torque values for any of the aft housing or rear flange bolts. Simply make them good and tight. And we'll finish up and get all the rest of these bolts. And two more in the bottom here. One final check on the flange bolts. I'm going to go ahead and remove the key from the keyway in the tail shaft. We like to install the key after the output coupling is started. So go ahead and slip the coupling on and line up the keyway. And just give it a tap with your mallet. Spin as needed to line the keyway up with the key, and then just tap it in with a ball peen hammer. Basically get it flush. We install the key this way because in rare cases the key can actually ride up forward of the output coupling and damage not only the coupling but potentially the thrust bearing. So just tap the key in as much as needed to keep it flush with the output coupling. Tap it on just until you see a few threads appear on the tail shaft. And we're going to put on the tail shaft nut. The tail shaft nut will actually be used to seat the output coupling. Now we're going to reinstall our output coupling holder tool, except in this instance we're going to use it to tighten the nut. Same as before, just snug down these 3 bolts. Now we'll go back and grab our 1 1/8" socket and breaker bar and tighten the nut down. As you tighten, you will see the output coupling slowly being drawn forward. You can really stop when you feel that the nut has fully seated. There's no reason to give this too much torque at this time because we're going to take it off again to install our tab washer. Now we'll move our holder to the loosen position and take the nut off again. I'm going to need to drive our key forward just a little bit so the tab on the locking washer will go in. And that's not quite enough. It's still lifted up a little bit. It's not fully seating, so I'm going to pull that off and give the key another tap or two. 1/4 inch is usually enough. Another couple taps. Let's try again. That feels much better. It's in nice and flat now. So we'll grab our tail shaft nut. This time we can fully tighten the nut. And we'll get that good and tight. Now we can remove our holding tool. I'm going to start the tab on the washer with my chisel and then finish it off with the screwdriver. And that's great. So now we're back to our brake band adjusting bolt nut, except now we're tightening. Using the punch, just keep tightening. You're essentially closing the ears on the brake band. Keep tightening. After 5 or 6 turns, go ahead and check the shifting lever. That's actually a little too tight. I don't have much of a neutral zone. So I'm going to go and loosen about a turn and a half. Try again. That feels better. Good forward, neutral, and reverse. A 3/4 inch wrench, either opened or box on, will also work to turn the nut. Something to watch out for when you do the final tightening on your adjusting bolt nut. You'll remember I pointed out the small shelf on the adjusting bolt. Occasionally, the brake band ears will get hung up on that shelf, and it will appear that the bolt cannot turn anymore, or that it's hung up. When this happens, don't force it. Just grab your channel lock pliers and compress the ears on the brake band a few times against spring tension to loosen things up, and then try to continue to turn. We can now reinstall our accessory drive bolts. Get those nice and tight. And then reinstall our reversing gear cover. And that's it. After installing your rebuilt reversing gear, you will need to adjust your forward and reverse settings. These steps are covered in our reversing gear overview video. Always remember to remove your shifting cable from the engine shifting lever when making these final adjustments. This way, if the reversing gear functions fine using the shifting lever by hand at the engine, but appears not to work once your shifting cable is reattached, you know you have a problem with either the shifting lever in the cockpit, the shifting cable mounting bracket at the engine, or the shifting cable itself. Thank you for your time. You can find the reversing gear parts and the specialty tools mentioned in this video, along with other Atomic 4 parts and services on our website at moiramarine.com.